Hi guys, I'm back with another video today, and with Mother's Day quickly approaching, I thought I would share a little bit about my journey to motherhood, and specifically what that looked like as part of a very cult-like church. It was a really difficult journey, and it's still difficult for me to talk about, but I think it's going to be very healing for me to share my story. I've shared about it some on my blog through written word, but I think just being able to talk about it, knowing that there are going to be people out there listening to my story, I think that's really healing for me. And I know that many of you watching this might also be struggling with infertility or some other motherhood related hurt, and maybe this will be healing for you too. So just a little bit of background information. I was married really young. I was 18 when I got married, and my husband was 21, and pretty much our whole marriage I knew I wanted to start a family. And I've always viewed motherhood as a priority. It's something I knew I was meant to be. More than just I want to be a mother, it's knowing that I was meant to be one, if that makes sense. So my desire to become a mother wasn't influenced by the teachings of the cult that I was a part of, but just my view of what motherhood looks like, what godly womanhood looks like, was influenced by my time there. So for those of you that might not be aware, my husband and I were able to finalize the adoptions of our 3 daughters just in March. We had been wanting to have a family for 12 years, and so I feel like it's a time of celebration and appreciation that this journey, we've reached the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. But I still don't like Mother's Day, and my time in the cult is the reason why I don't like Mother's Day. So I want to share a little bit again about my journey to where I am now, how Mother's Day was celebrated at the cult, how fertility and bearing children was viewed at this place as well, and just again my final thoughts in closing of how I view Mother's Day. So again, my husband and I wanted to have a family for 12 years before that finally panned out for us. I have several health problems that prevented us from being able to start a family the traditional way. I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, hypothyroidism, type 2 diabetes, and very likely celiac disease as well. All of those health issues have infertility as a symptom. So it just didn't work for us. We tried fertility drugs, and that just left me feeling even more devastated and defeated and sick. We looked into adoption, and the price of both international and domestic adoption of infants is astronomical. We knew that that wasn't within our budget. And so really, we knew that our only option was to become foster parents. We initially went to visit with a social worker and left that appointment again feeling devastated, thinking that this really wasn't what we should pursue. And it was only 2 years after that that we returned to the social worker and said, okay, we're ready now. So just an idea of the timeline, from wanting to become parents to deciding that we needed to foster, that was about an 8-year gap there. We filled out the necessary paperwork, took the required classes, and were instantly placed with an infant even before our licensing was finalized as foster parents. So we became what's called an emergency foster placement until our licensing was complete. We were pretty much promised from the get-go that we would get to adopt this little baby, and that there really wasn't much of a chance for him to return home. So we raised this little baby knowing that we were going to keep him. He was my first baby. I celebrated my first Mother's Day with him, and a few months after that first Mother's Day, I found out that he would be leaving us. And that is the hardest, most heartbreaking thing I have ever gone through. And I still don't feel like I'm completely recovered from that. In no way does adopting our girls replace this infant that I lost. Yes, I'm elated to finally be a legal parent, but I still remember the loss of this first child that we couldn't keep. And quite honestly, no one from the church that we were a part of at the time, and no one that was labeled a Christian really reached out to us during that season. Maybe people really didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who lost a foster kid? But we really didn't have any condolences, any help from the church at all. The way Mother's Day is usually celebrated in church bothered me during that season of infertility and not being parents. Especially at the cult that we were a part of, Mother's Day was a day that the pastor would select 2 or 3 women from the church to share on the topic of motherhood. This, mind you, was the only Sunday of the year that women were allowed to speak at all in church. And they were only allowed to speak on the topic of motherhood, frankly, because I think that's the only thing that the men in the church couldn't do was bear children. And so let's just leave the women to talk about that. After the women spoke, the pastor would call all of the women to the front of the church, regardless of whether or not they were a mother. So from the youngest infant female to the oldest grandmother in the church, all of the women were called up front and prayed over that they would realize their mission to be a mother and raise children and bear children for the kingdom of God, or something along those lines. And I always left with tears in my eyes, because unbeknownst to those people around me, that's what I wanted more than anything. And I couldn't have children. This was like the one thing that I felt like God called women to that I couldn't do. I couldn't do it. And then leaving the church, all of the women in the church were gifted a flower as they walked out. And I called this my pity flower, because it was given to me almost like, well, you're not a mom, but you can have one of these anyway. And I hated when people would come up to me on Mother's Day in church. Oh, happy mother. Oh, never mind. You're not a mom. I hated it. The last Mother's Day that I went to church there, I snuck out the back door just so I wouldn't have to get a flower and face the happy Mother's Day wishes on my way out. But then, like I said, I had that one Mother's Day with our first foster son. And it was like, yes, my dreams are finally realized. I get to be happy on a Mother's Day. And I saved my flower that I got. I pressed the flower, kept it, and then that baby left us. And that is really the only Mother's Day that I could fully enjoy. And even now that I have other children in the home, children that have been adopted now even, Mother's Day isn't really a happy occasion for me. There are scriptures throughout the Bible that pretty much equate a woman's worth to her ability to bear children. I'm going to reference my notebook in front of me again, but there are verses throughout the Bible. Pretty much any time a woman is mentioned in the Bible, it's related to the children that she bears. Starting in Genesis 1:28, God commanded Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. That was their ultimate mission on earth, was to fill it with kids. 1 Timothy 2:15, a woman's salvation is linked to her ability to bear children. I'm going to actually read that verse for you. This is the Bible I used when I was a part of the cult-like church, and I actually underlined this verse in pink pen, because pink was the color I used to underline verses specifically for women. And it says, "But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety." And that verse is actually in context of a woman was the reason that sin entered the world anyway. It wasn't Adam that was deceived, it was the woman, but she can help make things right as long as she has babies. In 2 Samuel 6 and Genesis 20, there are 2 different accounts where infertility is a punishment from God. It is an actual curse for bad behavior. And then there are a ton of women throughout the Bible who struggle with infertility, but ultimately God ends up opening their wombs and allowing them to have children as a reward to them. There's Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Samson's mother, Hannah, Elizabeth, again, all rewarded with their wombs opening and being able to have children. In Psalm 127, it talks about how multiple children are a blessing. Having your quiver full of children is a blessing to your husband. So again, a woman's worth and dignity is directly linked with her ability to birth children and expand the kingdom of God. So I couldn't do it. I couldn't bear children. And then when we began fostering, that comes with a whole other group of problems. Wondering whether or not the child is going to stay with you. Do I give this child my heart, knowing that they might take my heart with me if they have to leave? The rude comments that people make to foster parents, I have heard it all. I've heard things like, oh, I couldn't do that. It would break my heart to see a child go, sort of making it seem like we are heartless and that it doesn't affect us when they go. I've had someone actually say, I don't know how you could love someone else's kid. I had a pastor tell me to be careful bringing foster children into our home because we might get stuck with a kid of a different color or a kid that has a mental problem or a handicap. Lots of times people say, oh, well, what about the real parents? What about their real parents? Are they going back to their real parents, as if we're imaginary parents or substitute parents, as if the job that we're doing somehow isn't as significant as sharing blood with this child. I had a nurse at a doctor appointment once tell me that she thought it was really funny how foster kids sometimes refer to their foster parents as mom and dad. You're not their mom and dad. And that was with one of our foster kids sitting beside me who had just looked at me and said, Mommy, da-da-da. And just the nurse just laugh at that. Of course, foster care is difficult because the biological parents sometimes see us as enemies. They've got my child and I want my baby back. There are countless court hearings and visits with the biological parents, guardian ad litem visits. So the guardian ad litem is the attorney assigned to the child that represents them in court. So you have communication with them, visits at least once a month from social services, therapy appointments. We have done physical therapy, speech therapy, infant massage therapy, occupational therapy, intensive in-home counseling. We've done play therapy, art therapy. There's specialist appointments. A lot of these kids come in having additional physical needs that need a specialist's attention. We've had to do weekly weigh-ins with infants that were failing to thrive. We've been accused of neglect and abuse ourselves against these kids. Fostering is time-consuming. You lose sleep over it. You work all day for it. And you don't know if there's going to be any sort of reward for your efforts, so to speak. You don't know if you're pouring all of this effort into the kid just to have them walk out and leave, and their lives likely get messed up all over again. Fostering is the hardest thing I have ever done. I'm so thankful that we were able to adopt our 3 girls through this process, but I wouldn't wish this life on anybody. It is the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. We've fostered about the last 5 years. So again, in light of this timeline, we've spent 12 years wanting to grow our family, and just this past March was when our adoptions of our girls were finalized. 12 years of hoping and longing to start a family. So I am a mother now. I still don't like Mother's Day because Mother's Day is really bittersweet for me. That first Mother's Day that I was so excited and rejoicing to be a mom, I'm no longer a mom to that child. I want to be sensitive to my girls because they each had a mom before me. And there's a sense of loss there too. They lost their first mom. I lost my first child. Their biological moms lost them and don't get to spend Mother's Day with them. They're possibly out in the world hurting on Mother's Day as well, that they don't have their children to raise anymore. I want to be sensitive to other people on Mother's Day is my point. There are people that have really tough relationships with their moms, people that have recently lost their moms, women who are struggling with infertility or miscarriages or the death of their child. There are two dad families that their kids don't even have a mom to celebrate on Mother's Day. Mother's Day is hard for a lot of people. So I'm going to quote the Wiccan Rede here. I do not ascribe to the Wiccan faith, but there's this phrase that's a part of the Wiccan Rede that I really appreciate it. And harm ye none, do as you will. In other words, do what you want to do as long as it doesn't hurt other people. So on this Mother's Day, I wish you the best. If you want to celebrate with your kids, if you want to honor your mother, please do that. If it's a day that you enjoy, I hope that it's completely enjoyable for you. But for other people, Mother's Day can be the hardest day of the year. It was for me for a long time, and again, I still don't like to focus on it. My daughters are homeschooled, and unless one of them looks at the calendar and sees, oh yeah, it's Mother's Day today, I don't even want to bring it up to them. I want it to be just like any other day where we get to have fun and enjoy each other, enjoy spending time together without added pressure on them to have to make me a card or get me a gift, and without me having to focus on the struggle it took for me to get to this point, to be a mother, and the loss that I had to suffer to get here. So I'm not trying to be a party pooper. I'm not trying to rain on your parade. I do wish everyone a blessed Mother's Day. I hope it's a day that you can enjoy, but please be sensitive to those that may struggle through it. I'll catch you next time.